view the comments at the same time. I'll just be looking on the chat panel on here, so you'll get a look at the back end as we go. What you're listening to is this 3 hours of background music for studying that I found from this channel here. It's pretty good. I'm not big on music when I'm studying, but it's been pretty relaxing while I've been waiting for the stream to set up. However, I may reduce this down or even turn it off completely when I'm getting into it, because I think overall it is a little bit distracting. So we're going to be studying IB Psych today, and I've got some notes that have been sent to me by a student, and I haven't really looked at this properly. I've literally just flicked through, copied it onto a Word document, and I've got a couple of these got a practice essay that they have sent me, and I've just erased their name so you can't see their name. So they sent me this practice essay so that I could get a feel for how the information needs to be used. And then they sent me the guide. This is just, you can just download this online, so that I have an idea about it. And I'm guessing that the notes that I'm mainly using are from this, which is their, I suppose, summarized notes of it. And they were having difficulty applying our techniques, relational learning and chunking and all of that sort of stuff, to psychology. So I will see how we go. I'm going to do this a little bit differently from the last live study with me, in that I'm going to narrate a little bit more and walk through the process of how I'm thinking about it. I'm also going to just do a single screen so you can see exactly what am I looking at any given time, rather than trying to track like 5 different screens simultaneously, because that gets a little bit confusing. I'm on my laptop, so I'll be using Leonardo instead for drawing, instead of what I was using before, which I think was streaming off of Explain Everything. So this is a Windows app called Leonardo. I think it does cost money, but I bought it a very long time ago. It's a one-off payment, and I can't remember how much it costs, but either way, it's pretty worth it. Cool. All right, so we will get started, and I'm every now and again I'm just gonna be looking at this just to read the comments, because there's no other way for me to read the comments with a single monitor. Question from Lewis here: am I gonna apply the multi-pass system? I will. Not really, because I'm only going to be studying for 2 hours right now. I'm not really going to be sticking with like a specific system or technique as such. I'm just going to be going through and studying it, and you can see how I interpret the information. This study with me session is a little bit more of an insight into how I think and how I think about subjects like psychology, to help guide you to use the different techniques, because obviously techniques are layered on top of a background of some type of understanding. So, if you know how to think about the information, then you can do a lot with that information. You can manipulate it in any number of ways that you need to. But if you don't know how to think about the information, then you're always stuck inside this box, and you'll find it difficult to apply different techniques for. So I'll be basically doing an equivalent of, I suppose, sort of like a hip shot type thing to this. But the first stage is just getting my head around the topic and what I'm actually even meant to be studying. Like I said, I literally haven't even read this before, so I'm completely in the dark. I don't even know what the topic actually is. I'm guessing this is a topic about hormones and pheromones. But, well, I guess we'll figure it out together. So, let's get started. First thing I'm going to do is just have a look at the guide here. I just looked for the word pheromone here to see what it says. Biological approach to understanding behavior. By the way, guys, tell me if the music's too loud or what. Cool. Yeah, let me know if it's music's too loud or something. I'll be checking the comments every now and again. Okay, so hormones and pheromones. The Where's the guide? Oh yeah, here we go. So hormones and pheromones and their effects on human behavior. I'm seeing relationship between the brain and behavior. So what's going on in my mind right now is I'm just trying to get a basic understanding. I'm just trying to build that basic logic. And in fact, let me just break this down step by step so it's just really clear what's happening in my mind. Like, this is pretty much what I'm currently visualizing as I go through and read this. So, we've got brain, got behavior, and biological basis for that. Content techniques used to study the brain in relation to behavior. Okay, so we've got the idea of examining this relationship. And localization of function. Study one example of localization of function. Localization of function is a theory that certain parts of the brain correspond to certain functions. Okay, yeah. So we're really looking at where in the brain specifically. So this is kind of what I'm visualizing. I'm taking information and simplifying it and just trying to see what is happening. And I'm not even entirely sure if this is the right topic that I'm reading at the moment, actually. Hormones and pheromones and their effects on behavior. Hormone and their effects on behavior. Study one hormone and its effect on behavior. Study one pheromone and its effects on behavior. So brain here, we can sort of say that brain is, you know, hormones and pheromones, and then these combined lead to behavior. Okay. Little mind map tip is that when you've got two things that come together, like in this situation here, rather than doing two arrows like that, which can clutter the page, I generally find that it's better to do like this curly bracket, just like a little tiny little mind map tip that I've picked up. Genetics and behavior, yeah, okay, so I'm not really sure if this is the right topic, but it seems generally about right. Yeah, let me turn it down a little bit for you guys. Hold on, let me turn it down. How's that? Too quiet? Should be alright, right? Alright, cool. So, yeah, so these are the notes for that. So, you can see that even though I haven't really studied it, I'm not sure I'm going to need this guide anymore, but I'll just leave it open for now. Even though I haven't really studied the topic, there's already some kind of skeleton of what's this topic might be about. And even something as simple as this gives me a little bit of direction, because I'm genuinely going completely in the dark right now. Before I look at this, I'm actually going to look at the practice essay that the student has sent me, just so that I know, like, what this information is meant to be, used for. If you're already a student, you're probably not going to really even need this step because you will already implicitly know this, whereas I'm running off nothing. I have absolutely no idea how this information is meant to be used or what my objective is from learning this, other than just try to learn everything, which I'll probably end up doing anyway, but, So, let's have a look at this. Discuss the use of one or more research methods in the biological approach. Okay, that's a question that's being asked. So, research method. So, in my mind, I'm kind of linking that back to this thing here. It's like, okay, research methods is the way that we are observing the techniques used to observe the effects of pheromones and hormones on how the brain influences behavior. Okay, so I'm kind of anchoring that in my mind and doing a little bit of like mini consolidation, even of something as simple as just this. So it's just a constant process. One method used in the biological approach are experiments as seen in Rain et al.'s something abnormalities in impulsive murderers, brain abnormalities in impulsive murderers, and Newcomer et al.'s experiment on cortisol and memory. They used a natural and lab experiment. Okay, so it's just saying, it's basically talking about it and giving an example, right? Natural experiment is a type, just saying what is a natural experiment. Um, and then I'm presuming just giving an example at the end of that. Um, yeah, it's just like explaining it and then giving an example and explaining and giving an example. Seems relatively straightforward. I mean, if that's not really how it is, then let me know. But it just seems like explaining it and then giving examples using the studies that are have been supplied to me here, which is presumably the ones that you use. And I also read this thing here, this Team B thing, which is the way to evaluate studies in IB psychology, which is, I mean, that's fine. I don't really know what triangulation means, but I guess we'll figure it out. Ethics, that's fine. Alternative theories, method, bias. Yeah, cool, great. That sounds fine. Seems pretty straightforward so far. Let me know if I'm missing something. But otherwise, I'll just get into it. I'll just get into it. I'll just check the comments really quickly, see if I'm missing something. Yeah. All right. Cool. So, as usual, I'm just gonna scan through to try to pick out the main concepts. It's harder to do it on this because it's a Word document rather than like an actual more formal thing that has like headings that, bold words that just immediately stick out. But, whatever. We'll do it the old-fashioned way through just skimming through the material. So we've got endocrine system, and okay, so what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be picking out the keywords. I'm just going to store them mentally. I'm going to create some kind of mental image about what's going on with those keywords and the relationship between them. As I go through certain keywords, I may just end up Googling what those words mean, and I'll just do that like on the fly, and I'll just store it mentally until I feel like I need to put it on the mind map. So for now, I'll just read, pick out keywords, things that seem important. I'm always asking, it's very simple. All I'm asking is why is it important? Creating those relationships, looking for chunking opportunities, chunking it as much as possible, and just always going back to the why is it important. That's the main thing. Especially when we get to the studies, I can predict that is going to open a lot of doors for people in terms of seeing how something that they thought was quite memorization heavy can actually be quite natural and intuitive when you really try to genuinely answer that question of importance. Or I may be proven wrong, but I'm pretty sure that that's what's going to end up happening. So let's go through keywords. You can see that I'm not very rushed at the moment. I'm taking my time. It doesn't look like that much information to study, so I'll just get going. All right. Endocrine system. Let's make it a bit bigger for you guys. Just gonna open up a little notepad as well, just to jot down the keywords so that I know I'm not missing anything. So we just got endocrine system, hormones, pheromones, neurotransmitters, the relationships between that and behavior, bidirectional, different organs involved in the endocrine system. Testosterone, so we're going to the hormones now. Function of testosterone. studies to support it. Basically just the same guy, just doing a study uh, over the period of like less than 10 years. So when I'm looking at these studies, I'm looking at this right now, and normally you just say Dabbs et al. 1995 measured testosterone in the saliva of 692 adult male prisoners, found higher levels in rapists and violent offenders than in burglars and thieves. And then you might just try to memorize that, but I'm not doing that. Here's what I'm doing, right? First thing I'm noticing, Dabbs et al., this is the same guy, but this 1988 one, this is the earliest one that was done, right? 1988. So this is the one that he started off first. So Dabbs et al., he looked at female prisoners and found that testosterone was highest in the cases of unprovoked violence, but lowest where violence was defensive, e.g. in domestic abuse cases. So he found this correlation between testosterone and violent tendencies, and then potentially another correlation between testosterone and like maybe becoming a victim. So in my mind, I'm sort of seeing why was this study important? Well, this study was important because it maps out testosterone as having these two kind of features of kind of like a theme of dominance. So high testosterone creates dominance behavior, whereas low testosterone creates submissive behavior. So in my mind, I'm kind of picturing the spectrum. And that was 1988. So this is relatively early on. And I'm now thinking, okay, so the next study he did was 1995. So there's a period there of 7 years where he presumably didn't publish anything super meaningful on this. And he started with female prisoners. But the next one he does 7 years later is an adult prisoner. So if I was Dabbs, I'd be thinking, okay, I have this data from female prisoners. What would I want to know about testosterone in males? One thing that I might be curious about is whether you get that same effect in males where testosterone is already at a baseline level higher, or whether at really high levels it kind of just like evens out, or whether there's a societal influence to it. Right? So I'm trying to think, like, why is the conclusion from this study so important? And why did it take him 7 years to do this study? Was there an ethical reason? Was there a funding problem? What's the issue there? So he then did with saliva and 692 adult male prisoners. And now the first thing now that I'm thinking is, how many female prisoners was his original study on? Was it like 10? Because that's not even significant. So I'm thinking, why is the number 692 adult male prisoners important? 692 is a pretty decent sized number, so I'd say that a result coming from 692, nearly 700 people, is likely to be pretty significant. But it's not enormous. It's not like 10,000 people. So how reliable is it? I don't know. 7 out of 10? 6 out of 10? Further studies necessary type of conclusion is going to come from that. That's why I'm thinking. So what did he look at there? So he measured testosterone saliva of 692 adult male prisoners. Why is he measuring it in the saliva? You could measure it in the blood, but that's probably going to be more time-consuming. There might be ethical issues with that. It might be a safety issue with prisoners. It could be higher cost. Saliva is probably a faster, cheaper, ethically easier thing to do, and presumably the accuracy of the test is still relatively high. But that's something that in my mind I'd be thinking, like, how accurate is testosterone levels in saliva? Already I know that I'm thinking about this at a deeper level than probably any of you watching have actually thought about this. So I've memorized already. I don't even have to try to think about it. In 1988, Dabbs et al. did an experiment with female prisoners where he found that higher levels of testosterone resulted in higher rates of unprovoked violence, and lower levels were found in those in the case of defensive violence, such as domestic abuse victims. And then 7 years later, in 1995, he did another experiment for 692 male prisoners where he measured the testosterone level in saliva, and he found, in my mind, I'm already thinking, what was his finding? Could it be that they were the same findings, or was it different? And if, either one, why is it important? So when we read it, he found higher levels in rapists and violent offenders than in burglars and thieves. So again, we find the same consistent thing. So he found it in females, and then 7 years later, he did it in males, and he found the same thing. I don't know why it took him 7 years to do that study, but maybe we'll find out later if this study comes up again. And then 1996, just 1 year later, he did another study which looked at 12 fraternities and 2 universities. So 12 fraternities and 2 universities, not a huge sample size. 2 universities, not that diverse. Presumably in the same country, although I don't know. But universities within the same country, even potentially in the same state, there's the chance for that to be a very homogenous group of people. So how much can we extrapolate from this result? I don't really know. But given that he's already had similar results in the past, probably reasonable. 12 fraternities, again, not a huge size, right? But so members of the fraternities with highest levels of testosterone were described as boisterous and macho. Those with the lowest were attentive and helpful. So now this is new information. So why is this study important? Well, not only does it kind of reiterate the same thing, but it now gives new information, which is that low levels of testosterone are not just submissive behavior. Low levels of testosterone create this attentive and helpful behavior, which is actually positive. So in this case, it's not just that low levels of testosterone, because before it's like, okay, high levels of testosterone can make you more violent. Do low levels of testosterone just make you meek and submissive? But actually what we're finding is that low levels of testosterone can also make you, like good in certain ways. So now I'm thinking, how does that work? And why is that important? Do we learn more about this later? Right? So I've effectively at this point I've pretty much just memorized all of this, right? Like I know all of that, and it's because I've just thought so deeply about it. And you might be thinking, oh man, Justin, it took you so long to cover that amount of material, but look, for me to use that in an essay is like effortless for me now because I just know it inside and out. So it's just easy for me to speak about this topic because I'll be able to relate it to the studies so easily. I can even already start thinking about the potential issues with it. Like, for example, the sample size issue. For example, what was the reason for the 7 year gap? If there was a funding issue, is there some kind of bias there or some kind of conflict of interest? The 2 universities, does Dabs et al. Have some kind of relationship with those universities? There's questions popping up in my mind already, which I can use obviously as an essay when I learn more about them. So that's just a little side note there. Let's just get back into it. Let's check the comments very quickly to see what you guys are saying. Let me know in the comments, guys. What is it making sense? Kind of my thought process right now, and what do you think about it? Like, is it sort of deeper and different to how you normally think about it, or is it kind of the same thing? Am I missing the point about what the difficulty here is? I'm just gonna keep going, and I'll check the comments back in a second. Okay, so now we've got pheromones. It's fine. Defining what pheromones are, how pheromones work. Okay, and then we've got some different studies. Oh, so that's basically it. I mean, this is pretty much it. This is a pretty small topic. It doesn't seem too difficult. We've just got endocrine system, and then we've got 3 components: hormones, pheromones, and then neurotransmitters. And then we've got a separate thing which is organs. And then under hormones, we're really focusing. It seems like mostly just on testosterone. And then under pheromones, we just talk about pheromones just in general. And then we've got presumably studies that are going to support all of those things. So that's a pretty easy mind map to make, right? In fact, I've kind of already mapped it out here. The only thing that I need to add on differently is neurotransmitters and organs, and then go into testosterone more, and just give a little bit more space in between so that I can elaborate on it. So let's do this again. I'm just going to delete all of this and do it again. I'm not sure how big the neurotransmitters topic is going to be, but I'll assume that there's something to it, and I'll just chuck it over here. For the endocrine system, based on the notes, all I need to know is the components in the endocrine system and the basic kind of functioning and things. It seems relatively easy, so I'm just gonna go and learn everything in the notes about endocrine system now, and I might as well just get it out of the way with because I don't feel like it's gonna be particularly challenging. So same process again though, simplifying it, asking why is it important, just looking for those chunks. Let me just check the comments. Okay, slow chemical communication system, set of glands, approximately 9 glands, target receptors, target behavior. So in my mind, I'm going like glands, receptors, behaviors, like in that order, and it's slow. Neurotransmitters are faster than hormones. Hormones are slow-moving chemical messengers that travel through the bloodstream. So this sentence here basically says pretty much exactly the same thing as this paragraph here. The only two pieces of information that I'm missing is the 9 glands and the fact that target cells have specific receptors on them, which is almost kind of like obvious because what's the alternative? Like the receptor is just kind of like just floating around, like anchored onto like the ether and the universe or something. You know, it's like obviously gonna be attached to something. It's probably gonna be a cell. Secreted in small amounts of slow moving. Okay. Yep. Regulate cell reactions by affecting gene expression. So often they are gene transcription factors. Okay. Relationship between hormones and behavior is bidirectional. Behavior can affect hormones, and hormones affect or influence behavior. For example, if you're stressed, cortisol is produced, which, and then you can slow the production of it. Hormones change the probability that particular behavior will be displayed. Hormones influence behavior, they do not cause behavior. Okay, great, good. So I'm just mentally like mind mapping it, and then I'll just put that out on paper, well, on tablet, which in my mind looks kind of like this. Basically, that's that. And then just the fact that neurotransmitters are fast, which is just like a literal single fact. I don't even feel the need to actually write that down. Okay, let's memorize these now. So I could use modified method of loci. I could draw a little diagram like this. This is also fine. Let's look at alternative ways of doing it. I've demonstrated modified method of loci before. I've demonstrated it multiple times. There's demonstrations in the course. You guys should also, when you get to that level, upper camps, you'll know how to do this technique. It's not super hard. I don't want to demonstrate the same technique again and again. Let's use a different way of memorizing this. So I'll try to use pure chunking for this one. Okay, so let's go hypothalamus, pituitary, and pineal gland. So these are all in the brain. These are all in the brain. Okay, so that's one way of chunking it anatomically, looking at the in the brain. So let's go with that one. Okay, 3 in the brain. Right, so we've got 9 glands, but we're saying we've got 3 in the brain. 1, 2, 3. Hypothalamus, pituitary, and pineal gland. Now, a cheap way of doing it would be say, oh, 2 of them start with P, but it's not very meaningful, and you're gonna have to just memorize the fact 2 of them start with P, so it doesn't really help very much. Let's look for a different way. Again, importance-based or function-based is going to be best. Hypothalamus, small structure that regulates many body functions, regulates the pituitary gland, releases lots of hormones. Okay, so I know that hypothalamus regulates pituitary gland. Pituitary gland, master gland, releases growth hormones, releases oxytocin. Okay, so hypothalamus and pituitary are linked together. Hypothalamus regulates the pituitary, which is the master gland. What about the pineal gland? Pea-sized gland that produces melatonin reacts to light to regulate activity levels. So this one almost seems a little bit random in itself, and there's some really memorable aspects to this. So it's just calling out to me. I can't avoid using some little aspect of modified method of loci here. So what I'll have is something that looks like this. Instead of doing the lines like this, what I'm gonna do is have let's color my brain in so that it looks a little bit more legit and looks nicer on paper. I'm gonna have hypothalamus here, which is regulating pituitary, which is this master gland, including growth hormones and oxytocin. And then I'm gonna have another one, and this is where I can't avoid using such a golden opportunity for modified method of loci. And, come on, you have to have seen this coming. Okay. So now I know that I've got 3 here. So I can label them 1, 2, and then 3. That will just help me to anchor them with the numbers a little bit more. Just see how much clearer it is with the numbers. By the way, it's just like a small little detail, but it just makes it seem a little bit clearer. Let's move on down. So there's 2 in the neck, right? Parathyroid and the thyroid. Okay, parathyroid, thyroid. Obviously, parathyroid is next to the thyroid, right? It's in the name. Thyroid gland releases thyroxine. Underactive is sluggish metabolism. Overactive means difficult to gain weight because, presumably the opposite because your metabolism is too high. Parathyroid, 4 P-shaped organs. Again, P-shaped. Controls and balances calcium, affects excitability of the nervous system. Okay, so in the neck, we've got 2, one of them next to the other one, and it affects calcium, which affects the excitability of the nervous system, and then thyroid, which is thyroxine, which is for your metabolism. So I'm just trying to think, like, is there a way that I can chunk those effectively? Now, there's only 2 things to work with, thyroid and parathyroid. So in this situation, let me look down to see, is there anything else that affects either metabolism or calcium or nervous system excitability? So pancreas releases insulin and glucagon, regulating sugar levels. So, okay, sugar levels, metabolism, that could be potentially related. ovaries releasing estrogen, which is linked to the mood. Um, maybe, maybe not. Related to something else. Adrenal gland sits above the kidneys, releases cortisol, releases testosterone in females. Testes releases androgens, testosterone. So, okay, reproductive, we can definitely chunk that. There's no better way to chunk than combining the reproductive ones. So, can I do something with adrenal? Releases cortisol. Okay, now what did it say about cortisol above here? If you're stressed, cortisol is produced. Okay, well, what is the function of cortisol? So let's just Google that really quickly. So notice how I'm Googling this to help me to chunk it, right? So what is the function of cortisol? Boom. Do you see the chunk? Right there. So we have thyroid and adrenal gland being involved in things that help with metabolism, which is in a way linked to the pancreas because of its sugar level. So we can overall say something like energy as the biggest chunk. On one hand, metabolism, the other hand, sugar, right? And then parathyroid, which is for calcium, which is almost a separate thing, and then we've got our reproductive one. So let's put that on the mind map. Why, but I always like imagine sugar as like a red packet. There must be like some brand out there. I've got the advantage of like I'm a medical doctor, right? So like I already know this stuff. So it's a little bit easier for me to progress. The chunking is anyone can do the chunking using the exact same process I just used. It's a little bit easier for me to progress because I don't have to go and look up what is insulin, what is glucagon. Okay, that would slow you down a little bit more. But if you needed to, you would just look it up, and then that would help you chunk even further. I'm not gonna say four. In fact, I'm gonna say yeah, and again 1, 2, 3 on this as well. So how do I pick what images I'm going to be using to demonstrate different things? Well, it's actually very simple. I don't think too hard. I just try to visualize the word and whatever like image kind of naturally feels like it would be associated with it. That's the image that I use. So when I think about metabolism, I just think like burning calories or like something like that. So I just picked an image of fire. It's a little bit arbitrary, but I don't really care. It gets the job done. And notice also how I'm doing this whole mind map from memory, right? I've learned it, I processed it, I figured it out, I simplified it, I visualized it, and then all I'm doing is a little micro retrieval practice here. Okay? Just some maintenance rehearsal. It doesn't really help with encoding as much, at least not to a significant amount, but it makes it easier for me to keep this knowledge in my head so that when I'm reading other things, I'll be able to work with all of it more fluidly. Okay, so metabolism, we had the thyroid. Okay, so I know thyroid and parathyroid are related to each other. If I put thyroid over here, from a mind map point of view, that's a little bit awkward because that's going to create a link with parathyroid that's probably going to be around here somewhere. That's a little, you know, awkward from the arrow's point of view. So I'm going to put thyroid here because I know that I can then put parathyroid, you know, next to it like this. Uh, and then the other thing for metabolism was, sorry, thyroid, and that's thyroxine. and then that has an influence on, so if it's too low or too high. So if it's too low, you're fat, and then you're skinny. I could draw a fat person and a skinny person if I could be bothered. So I'm going to call this one as number 3, because number 2 is going to be the adrenal gland. Okay, and I know it sits directly above the kidneys. Right, that's why it's called the adrenal gland. It's adrenal, renal meaning kidneys. And this produces cortisol, right, which is in response to stress. And then I'm gonna, because I've already got, 2 other chunks here, I don't want to go too much. I could go, reproductive and then parathyroid next to it, but it almost doesn't really make sense, because I could just have one that says other instead, and with an other, I could have repro, and then the other one that I would have next to that is parathyroid, because if I think of thyroid, I'm definitely going to remember parathyroid, it's right. And so this is related with calcium, which helps with nervous system excitability. Now, if that's hard for me to remember, I could, number 1, go and look more about how does calcium increase or modulate nervous tissue excitability. And then I'd realize that it's because calcium is induced in the neurotransmitter release from the vesicles of synapses. And that might make it easier for me to remember it by learning a little bit out of scope. Or I could just figure out some silly way of relating calcium to neurons, like a really excited cow or something. And I could draw a little excited cow in there. Different, depending on how much time you've got available and how you want to do it. The first way, the best way to do it is always to figure out the real reason, because that's useful knowledge that could potentially come up later anyway. And I mean, if you're going down the medical pathway, you're definitely going to need to know that at some point. But the reason I'm doing it in terms of like other, and then parathyroid and repro, is because it allows me to continue this just trend of like 3 things each. So this is another 1, and under repro we've got testes and then ovaries, which is number 2, and then number 3. If I wanted to, I could be a little bit fancy here. Bring this out from repro, bring this out so its testes are here. So I can create a link between testes and adrenal for testosterone, saying that this is for females. By the way, if you struggle to remember the male-female signs, this is meant to be, I think it's like the mirror used by Athena or something. Minerva. Minerva is Aphrodite. Aphrodite's mirror. And then the male one is this, and that's meant to represent the shield and spear of Ares, the god of war. And you can use that, and I've got some interesting drawings that I've done in the past for like conditions and diseases that only affect males and females, where I utilize the fact of like a mirror, handheld mirror, in the image to show and remind myself that it's female specific, or I'll use like a spear or a shield, and that would be like really random, but because I have built these associations, it makes a lot more sense. Okay, let's zoom out a little bit, see what I've got. Typical classic mistake is working starting way too zoomed in. So I'm going to select everything and let's see if I can just resize this. Make everything smaller. There we go. Great. Okay, so this is what I've got so far. Okay. And I've, effectively memorized the 9 different organs. I know that there's 3 in the brain, 3 related to your energy, and there's 3 other ones, 2 of those being reproductive, right? Kind of makes sense in my mind. So I finished up the endocrine system stuff. Let's go through, and I think you get the idea of how I would study the rest of this material by now, hopefully. So I want to skip to some of the more potentially interesting stuff for you, which is how do I look at the studies themselves, because I think that's something that people find more difficulty with. So I'm going to move on to that, but let me just check the comments. Let me know if there's any issues or anything that you want me to clarify from what I've done so far. Yeah, how do you guys feel about this so far? Any questions? I'm going to go through the way that I'm going through the study. So the rest of the subjects, like the function of testosterone, the anatomical stuff, I would study that the same way that I've been studying all the other stuff. All the other walkthroughs that I've done, it's just information, right? Information and concepts. I do it the exact same way. Studies which are examples. How do I do this? Okay, you've seen a glimpse of it already. And just to show how what I've studied before is still retained, Dabbs et al. 1988, followed by 1995, followed by 1996. The first one was female prisoners, showing the effect of testosterone high versus low. The second one was on male prisoners, 692 saliva samples, showing much the same effect. And the final one was the one that showed that the low ones were more attentive and helpful, with 12 fraternities over 2 universities. Right, so it's just it's like naturally there because I just thought about it so deeply. Okay, this first study here by Dabbs and Morris, 1990. So this is now, so this is the study that he did in between. So he did 1988, and then 2 years later he did this study in 1990 with this guy called Morris. And the aim of this one was to see if there's a relationship between testosterone and antisocial behavior. Sex and aggression. So this makes sense following on from his previous study that he did 2 years prior, which was looking at female prisoners. He's now wanting to further look at the relationship between testosterone and antisocial behavior. So the first one that he did, the finding of that, why was that study important? That study was important because it was, to our knowledge so far, the first time that he saw the correlation between testosterone and violent tendencies. The second study, we need to dive in on that further. Let me just check the comments just to make sure that we're all good. Can we just write the key terms for the chunks? Am I following the layers of learning? Layers of learning is like an implicit part of how to think about information. I'm at a point where I'm not really even conscious about the layers of learning when I'm doing the technique, but yes, I generally am. I'm in my mind creating the logic first, and then I'm creating the concepts and building on top of it. I want you to think about that, re-watch this video when it's published, and just really think about what am I doing, like what information am I pointing out, and how does that relate to the layers of learning. I want you to think about that and watch, and you will see, because I'm narrating my whole thought process, you will see how it all comes together. Okay? Just need to be really attentive and pay attention. Can you write just keywords for the chunks? Well, I mean, that's kind of what I've done, right? So I don't know what I don't really know what you're asking, because I think it's pretty clear that's kind of what I've done, unless you're asking something totally different. Yeah, Connor, what scheduling app do I use? You're right, that is off topic. All right. So this is 1990, just 2 years later. Methodology, correlational study. Oh, okay, so so correlational study, right? So not causation, correlation. So just seeing, is there a relationship? Is there some kind of is there some kind of potential cause that can be later examined? Interview, survey, lab experiment. I don't know if this is saying that correlation studies are done through interview, survey, or lab experiments, or if it's saying that this particular study was done through interview, survey, and lab experiments. But why is this important? Okay, the interview will give you qualitative data, as well as will the survey, but the survey gives you semi-qualitative, semi-quantitative data. It's semi-objective, so you can do like 5-point scales, right? So that means that the data is a little bit slightly more objective, which reduces the amount of confounding that you can get from people just like talking about stuff and it just being like very, very hard to hard to like get meaningful data from. So surveys are going to give you a little bit better data that you can work with. And then lab experiments, this stuff should be pretty objective. We're probably looking at lab markers and things. So this is good because it's already telling me that the way that this particular study was done, it's likely that the results from this, if they're statistically significant, are going to give us results that are really reliable, because of the fact that the correlation is probably going to be very strong, especially if we see correlations between the interview survey and the lab experiments. I would be interested to know, were there differences between the results between those though? For example, you got certain results from the interview, but then the lab experiment showed the opposite. That would be really interesting, because that would mean that there's another factor that we haven't thought about outside of just pure testosterone. Sample size 4,462 US military veterans. So straight away, I'm already applying the idea. Why is this important? 4,462. That's a large sample size. Again, combined with this procedure, if the procedure was done correctly and there's no other biases, this should be a good, reliable result. US military veterans. This is potentially a big bias, given that military veterans are likely to be predisposed to a certain type of personality or upbringing or background or demographic, or there's going to be certain things that are similar between US military veterans compared to just a general population pool. Mean age 37 years. This is again irrelevant because it's representative of just like your typical like middle-aged person. If it was too young versus too old, there'd be question marks there. Representative of the US population and race, education, income and occupation. So this is just a blanket statement. It just says that it's representative. I don't know. Well, I don't have the raw data to view it, but if I just take it at face value, then I'd say, okay, fine. We're just going to assume that it was a representative sample. Having said that, I already know it's not representative of the US population completely, because of the fact that there are going to be some people that are less likely to join the US military than other people. So that straight away means that there's a difference there. Unless they were conscripted. Unless they're conscripted. Forced conscription. In which case that would truly be more representative. And I don't know if it was forced conscription. All participants served in the US Army and followed longitudinally from 1985. Half of the men served in Vietnam. Okay. Again, that's going to change things. Interviewed by telephone and underwent extensive medical psychological examination as Lovelace Medical Foundation. They completed the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, so MMPI, and were interviewed using a modified DIS, which provided information on psychiatric diagnoses and antisocial behavior. Okay, good. So now I'm knowing that they had a background check, and then they completed two different like survey things, the MMPI and the DIS. My question is, how reliable are these two tests? How reliable are these two interview survey frameworks? I don't know if it's going to come up later, but if it doesn't, I'd want to know. And just having a flick through, this is basically it. So it doesn't really seem to talk about it at all. So I would actually Google it. I'd look it up. In fact, let me just show you right now. Okay, so it's like the multiphasic personality, Minnesota multiphasic, Minnesota, and like just even this act of me directly trying to remember it and Googling it, like that tiny little piece of me trying to retrieve it makes me use the information and makes it less likely that I'm going to forget it, right? I'm applying it at least in a small way. Okay, it's a standardized psychometric test of adult personality and psychopathology. I want to know, how reliable is it? How reliable is it? Validity scales. There's something about criticism as well. This is not really what I was looking for. Criticisms. Scores on various tests are not representative of either percentile rank or how well or poorly someone has done on the test. Rather, analysis looks at relative elevation of factors compared to various norm. Okay, so that's just doesn't help us really. One of the biggest criticisms of the test is the difference between whites and non-whites. Non-whites tend to score 5 points higher on the test. There is continuing controversy controversy. I don't know why I pronounced it that way. There's continuing controversy about the appropriateness of MMPI when decisions involve people from non-white racial and ethnic backgrounds. In general, studies of such divergent populations as prison inmates, medical patients, psychiatric patients, and high school and college students have found that blacks usually score higher than whites. There is near agreement that the notion of more psychopathology in racial ethnic minority groups is simplistic and untenable. Nevertheless, 3 divergent explanations of racial difference in empire have been suggested. Okay, so there are some problems when it comes to non-whites using this test. That's a big problem because of the fact that the US population is heterogeneous in ethnicity. Therefore, how reliable is this test? We don't know. And that could actually produce some quite inadvertently racially disparaging results. I am interested to know, so this thing here, the difference here, this was noted in 1977, and the study before was done in 1990. So he already would have known the limitations of the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory for this population, because there would have already been, over a decade of research showing that there can be differences with different racial groups. So in the original study, I'll be looking to see, does he actually address this in this discussion? Does he account for it somehow, or does he just leave it at that? Because that influences the reliability of these results. I think you're getting the idea that I can probably, by the time I finish going through this, I can talk about this essay, I can talk about this study and use it in an essay however the heck I want. Diagnostic interview schedule. Okay, and I'll do the exact same thing just now for the diagnostic interview schedule. Then we're getting a lab exam with serum sample sourced from saliva. So again, saliva collection. So same way that was used in the later study, the one that was done in 1995 among the male prisoners. Collected in the morning before eating and were used to measure their testosterone levels. Participants were classified as high if they were upper 10% of distribution and normal if they were in the remainder of the distribution. Variables were adjusted for each individual depending on their race, testosterone level, time in the military, and location served so as to level out all variables that might affect testosterone. Okay, so here it's saying that variables are adjusted for depending on whether that might affect testosterone, but it's not about whether it might affect their survey or interview results. So this is the good thing about this study, where it's using the lab experiment as well as the interview and survey results. Because if you were to just use the interview and the survey, you would actually run into all the problems that the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory has if you weren't then compensating for it for ethnicity, like we've just realized there's a problem for. So then by doing the lab results, we're able to get a more objective number, and we can actually level out all the variables that might affect testosterone. For example, race, time in military, things like that. Okay. Findings. Individuals higher in testosterone more often reported having trouble with parents, teachers, and classmates, and being assertive towards other adults. That makes sense. Antisocial personality traits. Also often report going AWOL, having higher levels of drug and alcohol abuse, and reported having more sexual partners. Okay. So it's the same kind of trend. So here's a couple different ways that we can commit this to memory. One, again, chunking. So we're talking about dominating behavior, right? Dominating behavior, antisocial behavior. Okay, so we're seeing higher testosterone results in more antisocial behavior. Antisocial. Okay, what type of social? Leader figures, parents, so leaders like teachers, parents like authority, AWOL in the military, right? So we could almost say like authority figures such as or organizations. So authority figures such as teachers and parents, or organizations such as the military. We could then say relationship with peers or opposite gender, more sexual partners, drug and alcohol abuse. Alternatively, we could just commit this to a flashcard. Alternatively, we could use modified method of loci. If I was studying this in real life, I would do a combination of all 3. I would try my best to chunk it. I would try to express those chunks with a modified method of loci and then put that on my flashcards. Hence, testosterone can be linked to antisocial behavior, as higher levels of testosterone are correlated with more antisocial. This sentence is completely circular logic, and this entire second half is not necessary. The evaluation of it. Okay, so triangulation, researcher triangulation. Dabs and Morris worked in the team. I'm not sure what triangulation means, but I'm guessing it's talking about how they were like they use multiple sources to like zero in on the true result. So it looks like there's what 3 different ways of triangulation: researcher, methods, and data, which makes sense, I guess. It's like team, how, and the what. So they worked as a team. I mean, this is super weak, honestly. Like, I don't think I would really write this because it's just like they worked in a like. What does that mean? What does worked in a team mean? Like, how did they collaborate? How often did they collaborate? Did they peer check each other's work? These are the questions I'd be asking. So I think this is a bit weak. If I had the original study, I'd want to know a little bit more about their individual roles and how they corroborated each other's results. Method triangulation, multiple methods were used. Yep, that's good. We already knew that. So it seems like we've already been doing some of these things while we were reading. And we did that purely by asking the question of why is this important? But we did it combing through word by word almost. Data triangulation, looked at socioeconomic status as well as testosterone levels. Yeah, we've already talked about that. E, what did E stand for? E is ethics, that's right. Ethics, confidentiality was upheld. So, like, here's the thing, like, if it's not ethical, it's not going to get published. So the ethics must have been relatively okay, reasonably at least, right? So, confidentiality, okay, minimal deception was used. I don't really know what deception was avoided, because I don't have the original article, but I'll be looking for that. Participants were given full disclosure. Psychiatric assessment was delivered by trained professionals. I don't think this is an ethical issue. Psychiatric assessment being delivered by trained professionals. I think psychiatric assessment delivered appropriately is ethically sound, but being delivered by trained professionals, that's probably something more about like method triangulation, I would say. Potential harm in the way they were told the results. Personal information asked in interviews is potentially harmful. I don't know if that can also be extrapolated as well because they had a baseline psychiatric examination, which meant that their psychological state must have, and it's just extensive, right? It must have been to a certain level where they were deemed mentally sound enough. Like, I don't think you'd go through and do this huge thing on like someone that had like crazy post-traumatic stress disorder. And I don't know, like in the original study, were you told how the results were given? If the answer is yes, and you thought that that result was not aligned with something that was appropriate, then that's fine. But if not, then you can't really make that extrapolation because you're just making stuff up. You're just assuming things. So I don't know because I don't have the original study with me, but that's something that I'll be looking for. A was alternative methods. They looked at SES as well as testosterone levels, however, did not look at brain damage. Brain damage to prefrontal cortex promotes impulsive murder. So this is linking to presumably another study that we'll cover later, because I've seen that before. Not in this one, but presumably it was covered at some other point. So that's a good point though. That's a good point. Didn't look at brain damage. M, easy to replicate, produces quantitative empirical data, easy to generalize. Yeah, so like we've pretty much already talked about a lot of these. It's just looking at each thing and thinking like, why did it happen? And like this type of stuff, like, oh, use this study for whatever, is kind of not even necessary to mention because it's just so obvious at this stage how everything relates together. So, what was this? 4,462, I think. It was just short of 4.5K, right? Yeah, 4,462. Yeah, okay. So I feel I've got like pretty much just total recall of that. So, I mean, let's just do all of that in one go then, and hopefully that will demonstrate the technique enough, and I'm not going to have to do it for the entire thing because it's just honestly a little bit boring to do that. Not boring for me because it is an interesting topic, but boring for you to watch. Okay. Testosterone. Okay, so there's a number of different studies that were done, but Dabs, from what we know, this guy was like the man, right? So he started his first sub in 1988, and he was looking at female prisoners, and he found that testosterone levels, depending on whether they were low this resulted in more submissive behavior, whereas in here, this was more aggressive. Okay, so for example, this was violence on this side versus victims. Right, so that's what he found. And then 2 years later, he goes on to do, in 1990, his study that was looking at military veterans. So you can see the progression here, right? He does a study with female prisoners. I don't know how many, what's the number here, okay? That's important information to know. But presumably it's a smaller sample size. Presumably, the results that he got from this allowed him to secure funding and approval to do this huge study on 4,462 military veterans. And looking at a range of different demographics, where we found the conclusion of this from multiple different things: interview, survey, and lab results. Interview and survey being the MMPI and DIS, and we know that there are issues with the MMPI. And then I can't remember if we really talked about the lab stuff in depth, other than just saying that we did testosterone tests. Yeah, not really. Yeah. So lab, just doing testosterone tests on saliva. I presume I would I don't think of the word. I would guess that saliva was used for the female prisoners as well. It just seems logical. And again, the results that we found was that testosterone is linked to anti-social behavior. And again, some of those little details I'll chuck on flashcards and things like that as well if I need to. And then I don't know if he must have done another study in between, because there's a 5-year gap between this and the next one, 1995, where he does the male prisoners study, finding pretty much the same thing. So similar results. Testosterone was higher in violence and rapists, and then lower in burglars and thieves. And then 1 year later, 1996, he does his final study, which was... what was his final study that he did? Oh yeah, that's right, the universities one. Yeah, that's quite interesting for me, because like he does this huge study with his military veterans of over 4,000 students, and he drops down in the 1995 one to this really small study. Like, I want to read the original thing here, because I want to know, like, what new thing was he trying to find here? Or was he just trying to test the exact same thing again and again and again? Like, the 1996, this one kind of makes sense, because he's finding the attentive and helpful. I don't know if that was his aim, but it is interesting. It's also interesting that he does this stuff with, like, military veterans, which in this case is like trying to represent the whole US population, right? But then he does these 2 prisoner experiments, and the next one that he looks at is the one with universities. So is his aim with this study simply just to see if it's the same with, like, younger people? Because remember, the median age of military veterans was 37 years old. Median age. And prisoners, I don't know what the median age was there, but, you know, was he just trying to see, like, would it work with young people? I don't know. So 2 universities, 12 fraternities, and he found that testosterone, when it is low, increases attentive and helpful behavior. And again, what was the method that was used to assess that? Was it an interview? Were you interviewing their mates? Like, you know, a lot of potential biases there. But then when it's high, it led to more macho and boisterous behavior. Okay. And the one above this was 662, was it? 692. 692, just short of 700. having said that, you know, memorizing the numbers of exactly the sample size, I don't know if you'd need that anyway, like the exact number. You know, you can probably get away with just saying like just under 700 or nearly 4,500, because it, like I genuinely don't think that you'd get marked down for getting the exact number wrong. At least it wouldn't. It doesn't suggest that in the marking schemes that you would. Okay. Oops. So that's how I've gone through this, and how do I, okay, all that stuff about the biases and stuff. Uh, it's basically the exact same thing. You know, we're asking the question of why is it important, and so when we're looking, okay, research triangulation. Well, it was Dabbs and Morris, right? Dabbs and Morris. They apparently worked in a team, but I don't know how they worked in a team. So something about that. Methods triangulation. Well, we know because we thought about it so much they used the combination, right? But there were issues with that. And then we know about the data triangulation because of the fact that we used the multiple different data sources, and then there was an attempt to try to overcompensate. However, the big thing there is that it didn't seem to compensate for the issues with the methods of collection, which is, I think, is probably a huge issue, unless they accounted for that in the study and it just wasn't mentioned in those notes. And then what was the next thing? E, right? E is for the ethics, right? Ethics. I don't think we saw any problems with ethics. I don't know if we're just making it up by saying that there was an ethical problem with the way that the news was delivered, unless we know exactly how the results were delivered. In which case, like, I don't know, like, what exactly is the ethical issue with that? Um, A, alternative methods, the brain damage thing, the study with Rain and showing that prefrontal cortex damage increases aggression. That's a really good one to bring up. Uh, uh, what was it? Can't remember what the acronym is. The mnemonic. Is it C? Is it like M? M, which stands for method. Oh, right. And so this was, all right. So like, yeah, so again, I didn't read the full study for this, but I'll be doing the same approach, going through each method to think, why did they do it this way? Why couldn't they just do it this way? Well, what was the significance of doing it this way? Like, you just always have to think, if you were the one that's doing this experiment, like, why would you do it in a certain way? What's the reasoning and rationale behind certain behavior and decisions that you make? And then B, which stands for bias. I don't know about conflict of interest or funding issues. However, the conclusion that it can be generalized to similar populations, I don't know if you can make that because of the fact that we didn't really adjust for different personality traits outside because they're all military veterans, and I would presume that there's a pretty significant bias there, as in terms of like who the participants are. So I don't agree with that. Okay, so that's how I do it. And again, I'll do the same thing with all the other ones as well. Do you guys really need me to go through all the um other ones? Because it's gonna be the same thing. You know, newcomer et al. In 1999. Okay, this is a newcomer. Newcomer's a newcomer to the study. I haven't heard his name before, but he is fitting in directly after 1996, right? So it's an extension. Presumably, he's not going to do the same. He's not going to be doing the same study that Dabbs did. He's going to take it another step further, right? So he's looking at cortisol and memory. Okay, great. And there's probably going to be some kind of follow-on study after that. 1995, Wiedekind. 1995, same time as Dabbs' third study. MHC affecting mate choice. So now these are looking at completely different things, right? We're looking now at the idea of memory, declarative memory and behavior, and we're looking at reproductive behavior. So we're completely away from testosterone in that case, right? We're going completely away from testosterone. And in fact, the Wiedekind one seems more along the lines of this, you know, pheromones area, whereas the newcomer one is not testosterone, but it's cortisol. Doesn't seem like we've got anything in terms of neurotransmitters specifically, though. So naturally, you'd see how I'd add that onto my mind map as well, and then how I could integrate modified method of loci and flashcards. All right. Do you guys have any questions about that process? Because I feel like there's nothing more for me to really show. It would just be a repeat of the exact same demonstration, in a way, it was harder for me to use the summarized notes than original study, because when you read an original study, if you have a question, you can like look for the information in the study and you know whether it's there or not. Whereas when you're looking at like someone else's summarized notes, I don't know whether the notes are accurate. I don't know whether the information was in the study, but then the student didn't just read it, you know, and didn't put it in their notes, or like I'd rather just have the original because then I know if the information is there or not. But anyway, this is this is the mind map that I had at the end of it. The things that are missing here are a little bit more detail in terms of the function and the physiological things about testosterone and the functions that we skipped that page in the middle there because it's going to be the same technique. But I wanted to focus on demonstrating the aim shoot cycle using inquiry based learning, self-sufficient inquiry based learning, the relational priority learning and chunking that we teach for something like psychology, for things like studies. I don't know, like, let me know in the comments, is there a specific difficulty to doing this that I've overlooked? Or is there a specific question about how it works? Because it felt relatively straightforward. As I had mentioned before, the main thing seems to be kind of accepting that some things just need to be memorized instead of legitimately trying your best to answer the question of why it's important. Some people have that as a tokenistic question, like, why is it important? Oh, because it's part of the study. It's like, that's not really answering it. Why is it important means that you need to know, like, truly, how is it related to all these other things? What are its influences? What does it affect? So what I did is I just asked that question very, very strictly at a high level of frequency to come to the understanding that I have on this. So yeah, let me know if there's anything. Yeah, okay, I'll show you how I would do it directly off a journal article. I'm not going to use the same. I'll just find a random journal article and I'll just use that. This seems like a journal article. It's literally exactly the same, okay? Like, I don't know what you're expecting to see that's different, but it's literally exactly the same, okay? It's just that there's more to read. Oh, this is not even a, sorry, this is not a article. Let me find a journal article. This looks like a journal article. Maybe not. Okay, I see a DOI. I probably don't have access to the full text. Let me just search for something. Let me just search for testosterone and violence Google Scholar. I want to see the full text. Is there a full text available? Yes, there's a full text available. Okay, so look, exactly the same thing. Okay, exactly the same thing. I'm just gonna read it. I'm gonna ask why is it important. I'm just gonna try to simplify it in my mind, right? So, published in the International Journal of Endocrinology and Metabolism, atavistic residues of aggressive behavior prevailing in animal life determine blah blah blah. Testosterone plays a significant role in the arousal of these behavioral manifestations. There is evidence that testosterone levels are higher in individuals with aggressive behavior. This is published in 2012, by the way. Several field studies have shown blah blah. Aggressive behavior arises in the brain through blah blah blah. Okay, tell me what the point of this study is. Or is this not even a study? Is this just like a review? Oh, just my luck. I picked like just a review. Man, link me if you've got a better study for me to go through, because it's taking time for me to just find an actual study. Maybe this one. Assessment of aggressive behavior and plasma testosterone in a young criminal population. Full text links. And I need to buy it to have access. I do have institutional access, but I just can't be bothered logging into my account and everything. Hey, this one works, this works, this works. Great, I've got a study. All right, cool. So look, abstract, okay, background, this was published in 2014, right, by Trauma, uh, Trauma Monthly. Association between testosterone and violent behavior has provided conflicting findings. Majority of studies between testosterone and antisocial violent behaviors has used as clinical sample of severely violent individuals. These studies have mostly assessed males. The objective of this study is to study 6 differences in the association between testosterone and violent behaviors in community samples of young adults in the United States. Great. So even just through the abstract, I'm reading, like, I'm already seeing how this is important. So we've got like the idea, and it even talks about the same thing that I was saying before about how we started with these prisoners and then we were looking at these military workers, and then I wondered whether the 1996 study was to look at, just normal university students. But then again, it's only males because they're fraternities, right? And it's a very small sample size, only 2 universities, only 12 fraternities. So this one is trying to look at community young adults of both sexes and look at 6 differences, intersex differences. So in my mind, that has an importance associated with it, right? And because it's important, it's more likely to be retained. Patients and methods, a longitudinal study of inner city population. So inner city population. So again, this is, I wonder, okay, is there a regional difference? What if you live rurally? So that's another thing in my mind. That is like a gap that this study is not going to be filling. So can we extrapolate this to people that live rurally? I don't know. 257 young adults. Not a lot of people. Not a lot of people. So the conclusion of this study is going to be grain of salt. Like, it has to be conducted really, really well, otherwise the sample size is too small. Average of 22 years, range of 21 to 23. So very narrow range as well. They used regression analysis to see association. So regression analysis is one of the most basic correlation measuring statistical tools. If I didn't know that, I would Google what is regression analysis. Because if you don't know what regression analysis is and the pros and cons of it, you don't know how reliable the statistics are, right? It's natural. So asking the question, why is it important that they used regression analysis? Because you got to remember, they made a decision to use regression analysis. Why would they make that decision unless that was the best way to, interpret the data? So if I don't even know what regression analysis is, then I can't answer the question, why is regression analysis important? Because I fundamentally don't know what it is. So naturally I go and look it up, and then naturally that becomes more retained. Results. There was significant positive correlation between testosterone levels and violent behaviors among females, but not males. So this is interesting because this is something I actually mentioned at the very beginning, right? And this is something that Dabbs initially found. Oops, wrong thing. Dabbs initially found the opposite of, right? Dabbs found in 1988 that female prisoners had this, and then in 1995 he found similar things in male prisoners. But what about people that are just young in the community, not prisoners? Was there a difference there? This study has found that there wasn't a difference when it comes to males. So potentially in females where the baseline testosterone is low, doesn't make a difference. It makes a big difference. In males with baseline testosterone is high, for most non-severely violent people, maybe it doesn't make a difference. And in fact, it links back to what we were talking about before, where we learned that, it changes the probability of a behavior. It doesn't cause the behavior. So maybe another factor that influences the behavior is their pre-existing violent tendencies. Those with pre-existing violent tendencies may have testosterone increase their propensity for violent behavior, whereas it might not be. So again, all the stuff I'm talking about right now, this is not me just like teaching you stuff. This is literally what's going on in my head. I'm just thinking out loud. And the only reason I'm thinking this is because I'm just constantly trying to think of why what I am reading and consuming is important. Right? So, association between among females was significant, as it was above and beyond the effects of socioeconomic status, age, education, and race. So it means it was a very, very powerful effect. Conclusions were that our findings provide more information about biological mechanisms for violent behavior among young female adults, and the study also helps us better understand 6 differences. Yeah. I'll be looking in their discussion to talk about the limited sample size. I'll be looking in their discussion to talk about how it correlates to previous studies that were done, and I'll be looking to see what their method was to measure the violent behavior. And whether they talk about the inner city population part, and if there's any conflicts of interest. Okay, background, this is just going to talk about, everything that we know so far. So I'm going to be looking for that. So patients and methods, I'm looking for, do they cover those issues? What is the significance of their selection or exclusion criteria, right? Longitudinal cohort, inner city population, that's important, right? Data was collected anonymously, that's good. Participants provide consent forms. So anonymously means they're less likely to lie. Their consent form, so it's ethically looking sound. Study enrolled students in fall semester of 9th grade if they had a grade point average of 3 or lower in 8th grade, if they did not have a diagnosis of developmental disability or emotional impairment. Okay, so, right, like, this is interesting. They've got, like, a GPA cutoff type thing, which is, that's interesting. Like, how does that affect it and why? So I'd want to read more about why, and I'd be looking for that in the text. Likewise, with the method, let's say, testosterone was measured at wave 6 using saliva samples. Like, why was it measured at wave 6? Why wasn't it measured earlier? Things like that. For 1 minute, then spit slowly into a cryotube. Like, why do we need to do that, right? It depends on how much detail you need to know. You're unlikely to need to know this much detail for just a high school level essay. However, if you were doing a proper review of this at a level at like university or professional, you'd want to know what was their methodology. Did they do it for 1 minute or did they do it for 30 seconds, which might potentially reduce the yield or have a false result. So these are all things that you'd be thinking of. Samples collected after 11 a.m. to control for changes due to diurnal rhythm. So why is that important? Well, I remember from the previous study that all the samples were collected in the morning, right? Because testosterone is affected by the time of day. How do I know that? I know that because it's explicitly said in the study that the samples were collected in the morning before breakfast. So obviously there's something there about the time of the day. So on and so forth, right? I keep doing this, I keep simplifying, I keep relating to the importance, I look for chunks, and I just continue to simplify, and I may make a mind map about this later, and then put relevant other details in flashcards as I see fit. Was that enough of a demonstration of how I do that for an actual study? A basic study. Like, this is the stuff that I do, like, day in, day out, honestly. Like, I'm reading studies constantly around education, and when I was going through medical school and things and training as a doctor, like, it's just reading studies is like you read more studies than you do like anything else. So I have the benefit of having experience knowing how to navigate studies, but the thought process is exactly the same as what I teach you guys. It's the same as what's in the course. It's just that I'm at a level of competence where it is unconsciously competent. I'm able to do it very, very quickly at a high frequency. I don't have to think about it for very long. Whereas for a lot of you guys, you have to really slow down. And it's going to feel tiring. It's going to feel slow and, like it's being drawn out for a long period of time. But the level of understanding that you have of it by the end of it will be very, very high. And so when you talk about the study, in an essay, it will come through naturally. It will just be, it will just be almost like mindlessly. You don't even have to almost think about it. It's just when you're in a general conversation and you want to give an example, like if you're trying to explain that, dark red and bright red are not the same color, and you say, oh, dark red is a darker shade of red than light red, for example, like, something that's dark red might be like a berry, like a boysenberry, or like a, I don't know, like a, man, I'm struggling to think of an example of something that's dark red. Like old blood or something. I don't know. Okay, look, it's a medical thing. Okay, old blood is dark red. Okay, whereas bright red, that's the color of like, like a Ferrari, or when you buy like like a red pen from a stationery store, that's usually like a bright red. So the way that I give examples is just naturally, I'm just thinking about them. So if someone's asking me about like the different research methods that I use, then I'd say, well, naturally you have multiple different ways of researching methods because you need to be able to triangulate it effectively and accurately. And if you don't, then you're running the risk of having multiple different biases. So for example, a great example of this would be Dabbs. In his large military reference study of almost 4,500 people that we performed in 1990, he used a combination of interview, survey, and lab testing. And the failure to use lab testing would have meant that there was no truly objective data sources to correlate the results with, which already using only the survey and interview is significantly biased due to the limitations of the survey methodologies that were actually used. Therefore, this is why, it needs to be corroborated with other types of research techniques. For example, like lab work or other samples or systematic reviews or meta-analyses. For example, in this, this study with whatever, right? It just comes out naturally. And actually the way it comes out seems a lot more genuinely well known than someone that just memorized like, oh, this research method was used for this study, right? Because it actually means something. The fact is not just an isolated information. The information really means something to you because it answered a question in your mind. It was like, this was important. It's related to so many things. Again, it's coming back to those principles. Information and isolation will die. How do you create those meaningful relationships? And the fastest, most effective way to do that is to assign its importance and assign it with all the other things that are related. And when you assign that importance and you have all those relationships, you chunk them and you simplify them. And you can represent that on a mind map. Okay. Look, I think that there was a sufficient demonstration. We've gone for an hour and a half. I don't feel there's a need for me to go further into it. You'd just be seeing me doing the exact same thing as I've been doing before. Recording of this will be available. Right, recording of this will be available. We'll have it up on our YouTube, and we'll link to it in the course as well as a supplementary little additional resource for people to have a look at. But just come back to the basics. Come back to the basics. Come back to the basic principles. Information isolation, relational learning. Don't get so tied up with the technique that you forget about why you're even using the technique in the first place. You always have to go back to the principle. I teach people techniques. There's a reason I explain the theory behind the technique before I go into the technique. Like when I do webinars, people are like, yo, what's the technique? How do I do the study thing? And it's like, yo, just calm down. What you need to understand first is why the technique works, because otherwise when you run into problems, you don't know how to fix them because you don't know why the technique worked in the first place. That's what happens when you memorize stuff. That's what happens with your parents if they're really bad at technology, or your grandparents if they're bad at technology. And you're like, you have to click on this to enter your email, grandma. And then they just memorize it. And then so if the user interface changes, they're like, oh no, how do I access my email? But it's like, why can't you figure that out if you know the principle? And this is the thing, is that if you go through just trying to memorize everything and you don't really truly challenge what really needs to be memorized, then you don't see the principle behind the topic, and you don't see the principle behind the techniques that you use. So there's the Bayesian system that we teach, but there's other inquiry-based systems that you can use. You can modify and you can adapt it in multiple ways as well. And in order to truly become a self-sufficient, individualized learner that can study multiple different things very fluidly, you need to understand the principles. You need to know the theory. You need to know why techniques work. So that when you use a technique, you know what the objective is. You know what you're trying to get out of it. And if you run into a problem, doing your Kolb's experiential learning cycle to try to problem solve it, you know how to problem solve. You're not just thinking of random ideas. There's a clear theory of why it's not working and how it's meant to be that you can use as a reference point, as an answer sheet, so you can always calibrate closer and closer. All right. I think we'll end it there. Thanks for being a great audience. The recording of it will be available. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the course, leave them in our Discord. If you happen to be watching this and you're not a member of our I Can Study Pro course, you can check the link in the description or whatever to look into it a little bit more. Highly recommend it if you're interested in learning to study more effectively. If you are an I Can Study student and you're going through this and you picked up something new, make a note of it. Have that as your focus, practice it intensively, and then I'll see you in the live clinic or the monthly review. Our live clinic is coming up actually very, very soon. In 40 minutes, we'll start our live clinic today, right? So those of you that are members, I will see you very, very soon on our live clinic. Those of you that aren't, hopefully I'll see you as members eventually. Thanks, and until next time, see you later.